Okay, so let's look at Kahn's early work. Turns out that architecture generally is a late blooming field. I mean, you've got, depending upon whether you do graduate or undergraduate, but you have 5 to 6 years of education, and then you go work in an office, and you really, you might think of it, you should do 3 projects in an office, a small, a medium, and a large, like a skyscraper. And those projects can run 3 years. So it's like 9 years before you're ready to go out and say, I can build a skyscraper. On top of the 4 for the education, 4 or 5 for the education, or 5 or 6. And then you put a signal out and you're off, I'm here, and people won't necessarily come along right away. So it can be a late blooming field. So let's look at Louis Kahn. Born in Estonia to a poor family that immigrated to Philadelphia when he was 5. So pretty much he was, grew up in America. Could someone get, how do you want the lights on or off? How many want that light on? How many want it off? Let's see if we can get that off. Thanks. And then growing up, he was going to be a musician. He was very competent at the piano. And someone came to his high school to lecture about architecture, and he decided he was going to be an architect. And he went to the University of Pennsylvania. Typically, rich kids go to Penn and study architecture in those days, but he was poor. But he got along with everybody very well. He was generally respected as one of the best renderers in Philadelphia. Graduated in 1924, just as the Beaux-Arts was fading and modern architecture was rising. So the education he had there was what we just spoke about, a Beaux-Arts education under Paul Philippe Cray. And then he ran into a lot of bad luck, shall we say. He graduates in 1924, takes a few years to get his feet under the ground. 1929, stock market crashes. We're then in a continuous depression up until World War I. We get in 1941, and at that point, no one's building architecture. They're only building, factories to make tanks and airplanes. So it isn't until after the war that he really has a chance to get his career rolling. War ends in 1945, works with a few partners, and 1951 he finally does the building, gets a little bit of notoriety, and then 1957 to 61 he does a building of major importance. So he, very round numbers. He was 60 before he got started. So, he was educated in Beaux-Arts tradition. Here, in these competitions, one of his projects won a silver medal here and got published in a magazine. You go over to the library and see the project in a magazine. And his teacher was Cray, who early in his career, he did the Pan Am building, beautiful building in Washington, and then later the Shakespeare Folger Library that Kahn worked on. So he was very much in that tradition. Here's his student project. It's called a shopping center. We would call it a department store. But we already see hints at how we've got a narrow span, wide span, narrow span, wide span. We see how the structure is organizing the spaces. This is going to be very fundamental to Kahn's architecture, already hinted at in this student work. Kahn was a practitioner and a teacher, and he was equally immersed in both. He was very much, he referred to it as Talmudic dialogue. He's a Jewish tradition of argument, analysis, talking late into the night. And he used the term Talmudic. He loved talking with his students and his colleagues. This is Norman Rice, his classmate who went to Paris and worked for Corbu, who I failed to interview. So here he is on a jury, and key figures from the Philadelphia School we reviewed last week. Here's G. Holmes Perkins, the dean who put the school together. And this was the main library at Penn. And just around 1959-60, a new library opened, and this was given to the, it was given to the architecture school. The school that was called the Graduate School of Fine Arts, that was the architecture school, GFA. Now it's called Penn Design. But earlier it had sculpture and painting. It gave those up, turned them over to the Philadelphia Academy of the Arts. And then around 1960 it started to rebuild sculpture and painting. But the Graduate School of Fine Arts is really architecture and city planning and landscape architecture, even though it's called the Graduate School of Fine Arts. So I'm going to just call it the architecture school. So the architecture school is given this building, and it became the architecture school's library and some of its classrooms. And then today, around 1966, 67, right, if we're standing here, right about here, the new architecture school was built. Everybody assumed Kahn was going to do it. He didn't, and it really damaged the school, the morale. And what happened was, Kahn had done the medical towers that I showed you on the Penn campus, and not to badmouth anybody, but the feeling of the Buildings and Grounds Department at Penn, the department in charge of the buildings, was that Kahn's office was so unprofessional that they didn't want to have anything to do with them again. He was banned from doing any more buildings on the Penn campus. There were big problems with that building. I think they were as much the fault of the Buildings and Grounds as they were of Kahn, but that's a whole discussion. Kahn was a mixed part of the faculty. He was one of the studios you could choose. And then starting around 1960, he became the master's degree. So and it's very tricky. It was undergraduate, part graduate. I won't go into all that. But you got the first professional degree, and which is what you guys are doing. And then you could do a one-year master's. The one-year master's was with Kahn. It had nothing to do with getting a license. It was not accredited. But it was, if you wanted to spend time with a great master. And Perkins did something interesting with that studio. He got students from all over the world. So one year there'd be all these people from Turkey, another year all these people from Iran, another year all these people from wherever. And he later said what he was doing was that the people who he's going to get are going to be people who can afford to come. In those days, there's not a lot of scholarships, are going to be from wealthy families. They're going to be ruling the country in 20 years. And so he was using it to build global relationships with the school. So there are always these people from all these weird countries every year, these different. Kahn's studio was located right here where these points are. And it's kind of when I'm down there to go visit there, the Holy Grail. And now this building, when I was there, we'll look at it in some detail when we look at Venturi because he renovated it. This is from the 1880s by Frank Furness. Frank Furness, Louis Sullivan worked for Frank Furness, and then Frank Lloyd Wright worked for Louis Sullivan. So, there's a lot of lineage here. But anyway, when I was there, this building was black. Everybody burned coal. And, in 1950, if you went up to the top floor of Higgins Hall in the winter and looked out, it's winter. You get furnaces on, you're burning coal. That's what you burn. And there'd be black smoke coming out of every chimney as far as the eye could see. And this building's been cleaned. This building was black. All buildings were black from 100 years of soot. So about 30 years ago, this building got totally renovated, fixed up, and cleaned. Oh my God, it's bright orange! So it's a beautiful, beautiful building today. So I showed you this before. I'll just go through it very quickly. But both Kahn and Venturi are part of what's called the Philadelphia School. Now that has nothing to do with going to school. It means the Philadelphia Group, just the way we say the Chicago School for the 1890s skyscrapers. And there are three parts to the Philadelphia School: the city, the profession, and the school, UPenn. And it sort of centered around Kahn and Venturi, but all these figures were also important. And one of the things about it was that this is Philadelphia. This is Penn's drawing. William Penn was given this land by the English king, I guess. And he drew this map of what's called Penn's 5 squares. You can sort of see them down here. The Broad Street, Market Street, and then one, and then the corner of each one. 2, 3, 4, 5 squares. Here's how it evolved over the decades. And it's small enough that you can actually get a grip on it. It's not like, New York, which is just humongous. If you go down to the tip of Wall Street, from one end of New York to the other along Wall Street would be this part of Philadelphia. So it's the size of, Wall Street, downtown is. Then there's West Philadelphia here, and Penn campus is right here, and then South Philadelphia. Who comes from South Philadelphia? Rocky, from the Rocky movies. Anyway, and then they built this diagonal parkway going to the museum, and Rocky runs up the steps of the museum when he's exercising. And there's a Rocky sculpture right in front of the museum. So there's a unique interplay of city, profession, and education. And they're all in a state of rebirth. So the profession, all these new young architects are starting their offices. Kahn, Venturi, Jergala, Geddes. They're all starting in the late 50s. And the old architects from the 30s and 40s are fading. The city's undergoing renewal. Big city planning projects, they're coming into the 20th century. The school had been a Beaux-Arts school, and hey, time for modern architecture. So Perkins came in 1951, given a blank slate to rebuild the school. He hires these guys who are starting their offices. City Planning Commission uses these people for their proposals, not to build anything, but just to do proposals. And then all the school student projects are taking place somewhere in the city. So in every way, the city, the profession, and the education are intertwined. They're very much, the Philadelphia School is interested in an urban context, a background architecture, not making sore thumb architecture that's going to be heroic, but something that integrates with a given urban fabric. So that's the context that Kahn and Venturi were part of. This is, This is a sesquicentennial, 150th anniversary of the United States, a World's Fair. It was not a big deal. I had to really search to find, we have all the magazines in the library. And not just on microfilm, we have the, Pratt's been around 100 years, 150 years. We have the magazines, going back 100 years, actually on the shelf. And so I go looking for this World's Fair, and there's not much about it. But this is a drawing by Kahn. He worked for the chief architect of the World's Fair. This is a drawing he made while traveling in Europe. This is, I think, Siena. And then this is the Shakespeare Folger Library that he was chief draftsman or project manager on for Paul Philippe Cray. So that's some of his early experience. Here's some of his drawings when he's traveling in Europe. This is, I think, an Egyptian temple. He's very influenced by Picasso and Miro. This is from the, not sure when it's from. I'm not going to say because I'll get it wrong. But very influenced by certain modern artists. This is drawing, what's this of? Hello? The Acropolis in Greece. There's the Parthenon. So Greek temple, ruins. This is the square in Siena, very famous. Now, influenced by Le Corbusier, in the 1930s, here's Le Corbusier's Ville Radieuse. So Corbu is proposing a new city of the future that responds very importantly to what's the big new technological thing he's responding to in the 30s. Yeah, the automobile. You know, hey, it's not it's not horse and carriages. You got cars here. We need big boulevards. We need highways. And he proposes, Corbu does, Center City is going to be lifted up. So all the trucks come in, deliveries underneath, and up here is pedestrians, no cars, and then there's a scale of these are office buildings and then residential buildings. They're all high-rise, so we can maximize the amount of open space where you get light and air, kids can play. So he's rationalizing the city, and he does something like this for Paris. So he proposes tearing down the center of Paris. This is not serious. No one's going to do it. I mean, you could do it. You could say, I propose, tearing down the center of Manhattan and putting up whatever. If your drawings are good enough, people pay attention. And people have done it. So he did a plan like this for Paris, where he's superimposing this on the city of Paris. Well, here's Philadelphia. Here's Broad Street, Market Street, City Hall in the center, the Delaware River, the Schuylkill River, and here is Kahn redoing the whole city a la Corbu. And we can't really see it down here, but he goes down to the individual block and the individual housing unit. So he's going to redo the whole city right down to every apartment. So this is pretty egotistical visionary here. But it's what people were doing at that time. And not necessarily, he's even straightening out the river here. So this is some Corbu influence. Here's more of this going into the 40s. Here again is the 30s. The making wide boulevards, modern buildings, and this is pretty pathetic. This is pretty bad architecture. First of all, it's very anti-pedestrian. How do you get across a street that wide? Everybody's supposed to be in a car. And then the cars are pulling in here, cutting off pedestrians. And then what kind of architecture is this? You're going to bump your head on this because it's cutting across the sidewalk. But anyway, these are these grand thoughts, and I don't think that this is very good, but it's the kind of thing that people were doing at that time. And then he gives it even more thought. He's thinking about the city, and he says, there's stop streets and go streets. All the streets are jammed. Everybody's using There's beautiful streets in Philadelphia. Everybody's using them as to get through. Well, eventually, let's go back here. Eventually, they put a highway here. You come over the bridge. Where is it? I'm not sure where it is. Right about here, I think. You come over the bridge. If you want to get from one part of the city to another, there's a highway cutting across. You don't have to go on local streets the whole way. So, I'm sorry, I'm going the wrong way. So Kahn says, let's have stop streets and go streets. So a go street is like a boulevard that shoots through. Stop street is, I want to go here and drop off somebody who's going to go shopping. So for local traffic and then express through traffic. And then let's catch the people coming from out of town in giant parking structures. And then they can walk in the center city. So interesting ideas. None of this is going to happen. He doesn't own the land. You can propose to tear down all of Pratt and put up a modern, some visionary university. Great. They might put it in the glass cases in the library. But I don't think they're going to tear down Pratt. But you can propose it. So these are the parking structures. And these are inspired by the towers at Carcassonne, which is a French fortified city. And then he starts thinking, this is going to be very important to Kahn's thought. He starts thinking about the meanings of these things. So this, for example, is a football stadium. And he thinks that there's, the body, the mind, and the spirit. You can need a university, a stadium, and a cathedral to serve the different parts of the whole human being. And part of the whole human being is the body. And he was on what's called the Fine Arts Commission. If you wanted to do anything public, it had to be passed by them. And so they were building a new football stadium. It had to be approved by the Fine Arts Commission. It had a giant, Jumbotron TV screen. So you could, because you can't see anything on a football field, right? I mean, who's got the football? It's hard enough to tell on TV when they got a circle around it. You're up there in the stadium looking down there. So then they show the replay on the TV, right? Anybody ever go to a football game? College or pro? No. So you can imagine what it's like. So Kahn vetoed the TV screen. He says, we don't go to a football stadium to watch TV, we go to watch gladiators engaged in physical combat. Well, eventually they had to build it. Every football stadium has a giant TV. But that's the way he thought. I'm going to see more about that. That these aren't just forms, but they have meanings. This is a very famous model made in plasticine clay. Now, next week we're going to see the medical towers, which is to this day regarded as one of the great buildings of the 20th century. And we'll also see his very next building, or shortly the next building, the Salk Center, another major building of the 20th century. He does a somewhat appreciated building before that, but that's really his first important building. Well, that's I'll have to look at the date, but ballpark 1960. I think they started around 1957. Sort of an expert because it's being built outside my dorm window. So I know the building pretty well. But this is what he's doing in the 1930s. This is pretty mediocre. This is a synagogue. And this is a brick wall. And yeah, he's got big concrete beams here. Okay. I don't even know if that still exists. Like, no one goes there to photograph it. Too embarrassed by it. But the point is, he's doing very mediocre architecture. This is something called Roosevelt, New Jersey. And it's a new development community during the Depression. And it's modern because it's white and it has flat roofs. But the people living there don't like flat roofs. They're building an extension with a slope roof. Among other things, flat roofs leak. So I got this one off the internet. I got this one out the bus window, and I got a tour of it. But it's interesting to see people struggling against modern architecture, even though they're forced into it. This is a psychiatric hospital he did in 4950. And it's very much like what other people are doing. Yamasaki, who did the original World Trade Center, his stuff looks sort of like this. This is kind of modern, this canopy, being a kind of folded plate, that's kind of a modern thing. Exposed trusses. And then these actually are giant wooden shades that slide up and down. That's an interesting idea. It's trying to deal with controlling light. So this is occupational therapy, that's psychiatric hospital. And then this Y-shaped plan, that was kind of typical of the time. Supposed to get everybody good sunrise and sunset, Now, these are some houses by Kahn. And I'm going to say something right away. I don't cover Kahn's houses. I've been to a couple of them. I don't think they're that interesting. Some other people do. There's a guy named Bob Whitaker, who's the head of the archive at the University of Pennsylvania. They have all Kahn's stuff, and a lot of other architects as well. He did a book on Kahn's houses. So if you're into Kahn's houses, there's a book. They're strongly represented. But here are the 6 key houses. Here are the plans. And as he's exploring ideas, he'll do them in his houses, and then he'll get a larger institutional building. This is housing built during World War II when they were putting up thousands of quick units had to go up, like they're building an airplane factory, they're going to have 20,000 workers. They needed 20,000 housing units real quick. So Kahn was involved in a lot of that during the war. And I just don't have a lot to say about this. So anybody who wants to, hopefully the book's in the library. If you don't find it, let me know. I'll make sure they get it. And you can look into it yourself. Here, the idea that the structure should organize the spaces. So see these big columns. And they are defining each of these spaces. Only thing is, those columns are big enough to hold up a 20-story building. This is a 1-story house, or a 2-story house. So he's exploring ideas, but they're not necessarily appropriate to what he's doing here. Here's something interesting. This is a sketch he does in the late 40s. And this is a proposal for a kind of a sort of a monumental center of the moment. It's sort of, if we were to make a Gothic cathedral today, what would it be like? So here's a sketch section of his of a Gothic cathedral. And then here is plan for, he didn't figure out what he's going to do the sides. But this is welded cast steel, very elegant avant-garde material. And this is plastic domes. So very science fiction. And later, he never did anything like this. And later he said, I believe that the architecture will be of the future. I believe that the architecture of the future will look like giant insects. They will be made of thin members of cast steel and of plastic. But I'm not comfortable building that way. I'm comfortable building in masonry. So his buildings are brick and concrete. He never does a steel building. He does concrete buildings and brick buildings. And so he would not advocate that anybody else should do a brick building. But that's what he's comfortable doing. And he thinks, maybe somebody should do this. And maybe somebody has. Maybe this is college travel. But here you can see how in the Gothic section of the flying buttress, they've made it as thin and light as possible, but still pretty massive. And now with our modern steel, we can get it, we can achieve the Gothic dream of super lightweight. Now, I've showed you this before, but over the years, starting in the 1930s in the New Deal, we start to build public housing. Now, there's a long tradition of this, particularly in England and in Germany. To this day, we have the problem that, the culture is wealthy enough. There's enough wealth. But there are people who can't afford adequate housing or food. Even in some cases, working people. So that, I don't know what the number is, somebody published that 20% of all people working packing in Amazon warehouses are on food stamps. So even though they're working full time, they're not making enough. What do you do? We now have a negative income tax. They get, instead of them paying taxes, they get money back from the government. You have welfare, you have food stamps, you have, for a long time, we have public housing. And there are projects, you can go this way from Pratt and see a project. This is sort of right across the street, one of those projects. So they're all over. There's one just down the street that way. There have been problems with them. Some of them are architectural, and some of the problems are they put the wrong people in them. But I'm not going to get into all that. Occasionally, they try to get big-name architects to do these. I work for a big-name New York architect, Ulrich Franzen, and we did one. It didn't go ahead, but I was actually job captain on that one. And at the same time, Paul Rudolph did one. There's a public housing project by Paul Rudolph just a couple blocks from the Yale campus, just 3 blocks from the 2 Kahn buildings. So Kahn gets a commission to do this public housing. Well, he had been a socially conscious architect all during the 30s, during the Depression. He's on committees. He's on, for helping architects, for doing public housing, for the city of the future, for New Deal, fighting the Depression type stuff. So he was a very socially conscious architect. And he gets this commission, 56 to 63, for Mill Creek public housing. It's a big project. It's got high-rise, medium-rise, and low-rise. And that's thought to be good. It serves different purposes, and a lot of good things about this I'm not going to go into. But are we fooling ourselves as architects if we say, aha, I've got this precast concrete, look how it articulates the entrances of the buildings? Well, okay, is that going to make less crime in the public housing project? What are we doing here? And I don't mean that in the sense that they're missing the obvious answer, because I don't think there is an obvious answer. But this thing was such a failure. When I would, it's not too far from the Penn campus, so, it's a Kahn project. I visit it. Well, we don't really see it here, but these people have a lot of kids, and they're not necessarily supervising the kids that well. Well, what is a kid going to do with a balcony? So there is floor-to-ceiling cyclone fencing here. Otherwise, the kid will go, if it's just a railing, the kid will go over. So you go there, and these kids, the parents put them out on the balcony, just go out and play. And the kids like this, like insects stuck onto a screen all over this thing. These kids stuck to these cyclone fencing. So they blew it up. And this is not, what's the famous one they blew up? Purudaiga. They've blown up most of them. Almost all of them in Philadelphia blown up. They didn't blow up any in New York, because New York, as bad as it is, are so well run that they actually sort of work compared to other cities just gave up. And so they've been taken down. Okay, now we're starting the real deal. This is a very minor project, but a total revolution. So 1954, 1959, Trent Jewish Community Center. And did he have the commission? Did he not have the commission? Long story, doesn't really matter. We're just interested in the architecture. It was never built. There's a bathhouse. Where's the bathhouse? Right here. This is where here's the swimming pool. Here's where you change your bathing suit. That got built. Here's the community center. Never got built. But there's something going on here. And what's going on is, see these forms. They're like little pavilions. And these are bumps coming up our skylights. And so what he does is, okay, so what's the program? The program is, it's like a Y. It's got a basketball court, gym, multi-purpose meeting room, small, medium, and large spaces, etc. A little bit of everything. So what he does is he makes a column grid. Now I should make a drawing where all we see are the columns. These are the pavilions. But here we've got column, 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 column. And notice what we have. Narrow span, wide span, narrow span, wide span, narrow span, wide span. Going the other way. Narrow span, wide span, narrow span, wide span. So that's our grid. It's like a checker tablecloth grid. Now, what does this give us? Let's go to Corbu. Corbu tried to deny structure. What he did is he said 5 points toward a new architecture. And maybe I should go into that more. But in 5 points toward new architecture, he said the old architecture, the wall was masonry and it held up the building. It's a thick, heavy wall. Now, what holds up the building are the columns. They can be steel or concrete. That means the wall can go anywhere you want. It's called the free plan. It means column grid, walls go anywhere you want. Now, where would you put the furniture? If this is an office or a house. Well, here's the thing. Corbu metaphysically assumes that the column becomes a point. It's not there. You can't walk into it, but you can do anything around it as long as you don't bump into it. It has no architectural, organizational impact. We can put the walls anywhere we want according to the functional needs, not according to the structure. Kahn's revolutionizing that. He makes this drawing. And so here's his pavilions, here's his columns. He shows a person in a bed. He says, you cannot sleep in 2 rooms at the same time. Now you can, but you shouldn't. So what he's showing here is that this is your bedroom, say from here to here. You know what the column has a kind of a symbolic presence. It's putting a curtain across the room, and it right through the middle of me. You know, like, let's respect the structure. It's making an implied space within the space, even though there's no wall. So let's say there was a bump here, a column bump, and another one over here. That would make us uncomfortable. We've got this group and this group. Which group are you in? And I'm like, got the thing going right down. Let me get over here. Yeah, the structure means something, not it is something. Everybody knows it is something. You know, it's going to hold up the roof. It's made out of concrete. But architects have forgotten that it means something, that it is creating implied organization. So, for example, we don't have a single record here. Okay, so follow my implied drawing here. Now, I'm going to put a column here and a column here. So there's an implied wall across here. I'm up here giving the lecture. You're down here in the audience. So it's dividing lecturer from audience. It's making sense. It's creating my space and your space. Now suppose I'm lecturing up here and the columns down here. It's like, it's making the people in the back third of the room feel like they're not part of things. Now, in the auditorium downstairs, that's very much working. And you see everybody hanging out to the back because the column's protecting the, you know how you want to be in, some people want to be in the back. The column establishes as long as I'm in the back of those columns, I'm in the back. Now there's nothing there, but it's implied. That's one of Kahn's revolutions. So now, with this column grid, the narrow spaces can make corridors. So corridors don't go like that. They're, need new batteries. They're accumulated in the accumulated narrow spaces. That's your corridors. Not always, but if you're going to have a corridor, make it out of the narrow spaces. If you're going to have a small office, make it one of these guys. If you're going to have a big multi-purpose room, make it 4 of these guys. If you're going to have a big gym, make it, whatever, 9 of these guys. Now, if you have a multi-purpose room or a big gym, well, let's back up. We have 3 kinds of columns. I should do a close-up of this, but we have these little dots. These columns are not carrying very much. Then we have these bigger guys. They're carrying this pavilion roof. They're carrying one of these guys. This is the gym. They're carrying one of these guys. Now what happens is we leave these 4 out to make this big multi-purpose room. These become big girders. These columns are bigger than the others because they've got to hold up not just, you know, one little pavilion, but they're making a bigger span to hold in more weight. So we have a hierarchy. And now we get down to an office and we say, I need a storage closet. Great, it's one of these, or we need a toilet. Then it's one of the little squares. So we have little squares, rectangles, and big squares, and composites. So just like we have a hierarchy of columns, we have a hierarchy of spaces. Anywhere from a little, you know, whatever, 6 by 6, to a 15 by 15, to a whatever. But they're all, you know, baby bear, mama bear, papa bear, they're all in the same family. And then if sometimes we want, let's find one. Sometimes one of these guys is our office. But sometimes this is our office. We add this little rectangle to the square. Okay, but this is where the file cabinets are, or the Xerox machine is. Or it's different from the activity of the other part of the space, because it's recognizing that it's cordoned off in a way. So it never gets built, and this is what is built, rather undistinguished. But, we have another laser pointer here. They do build the bathhouse. And so what do we have here? It's sort of that idea. We've got 5 squares. So we have this grid, and 4 of the squares get roofs. One of them's open as a courtyard, and they're held up by these U-shapes. And these U-shapes are structured that are so big they can be lawnmower storage. They can be a toilet. They can be, you change your bathing suit in here. So you come in here and you go like around like this. So it gives you private, you know, there's no door, but you can't see him because you're going around this. The view is cut off. And then he puts these roofs on it. So those old pavilions get manifest here. This was all bleeding lime from the stone, but this has been restored. It's in good shape now. This is one that was in bad shape. This has now been cleaned up and it's respected. Okay, so this is our last project for today. And Kahn was teaching at Yale. And he lived in Philadelphia, his office was in Philadelphia, but he took the train to Yale regularly. I'm not sure how many days a week. And starting around in the late 50s, Perkins is rebirthing the school and talks Kahn into coming to teach at Penn. So then he's back home and it's all together in Philadelphia School. While at Yale, 1951, comes an opportunity for a commission, new building. It's the first post-World War II building on the Yale campus. Now, the Yale campus was, you know, it's one of the Ivy League colleges. They weren't as big a deal in the 1950s as they are now. They're now, you know, to get into Harvard is like a guarantee of a life of success, right? It's a big deal. And Harvard's got, what, $30 billion endowment or something like that? So Harvard's always been Harvard, but not like it is now. And same with Yale. So, you know, Yale was important, but now these are big deals. Anyway, this is the first building on the campus after World War II. And maybe for quite some time before that as well. So it was kind of a big deal. And Kahn was teaching there, and he wanted the commission. Now, a friend of his teaching there was Vincent Scully. Just died a few weeks ago. And Vincent Scully was the great historian of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, a great architectural historian. I went to Penn, he taught at Yale, so I didn't study with him, but he was the historian we envied that we didn't have Scully at Penn. And we read his books, and I heard him lecture many times. He was a friend of Kahn's, and Kahn went to him to see if he'd help lobby for him to get the commission. And Scully said, now, at this point, Kahn is 50 years old. He's never done he's done crap that we've seen so far. And there's big architects out there, that have track records. So who should Yale get? Somebody who's done that bathhouse where the mortar is staining the bricks, the blocks, or some big name architect. Well, Scully says to Kahn, face it, Lou, you're a great teacher, you're never going to be a building architect. Who knew? Took another 10 years, but he became the most prominent architect of his time. So you never know. He got the commission. And so here is, let's get another view. So right here, you can just see a piece of it, is Paul Rudolph's Art and Architecture building, where the architecture school eventually was. It was in Kahn's building until Rudolph did this in the 60s. Right here is Kahn's Yale British Studies, his last building, and we'll see that in a few weeks. Here is an existing museum, and then here is Kahn's extension to the existing museum. So this was the architecture building, and as soon as architecture moved out, it expanded the museum. Looks like a plain brick wall to me. Now, we don't think anything of that today, but this is what the other buildings are looking like, with the Gothic ornament. And the alumni, not architectural alumni, come back to see the first new building on the campus where I graduated in 1920 or something, and they're looking at a blank brick wall. Oh yeah, but look at the string courses. He's got, a string of bricks here to tell you there's a floor plate here. Okay. Very Misesian in a way, with this glass facade, 1951. Now, the Seagram building is until 1958 by Mies. But Mies is already in the late 40s and early 50s doing the glass apartment buildings in Chicago. Now, here's the existing museum. Here's the new museum, the new building, architecture school now museum. This is a connector, and look what he does. He's got columns, 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 columns. Wide span, narrow span, wide span. Then, this is a reflected ceiling plan. So now we're looking up, and this is the ceiling. He's influenced by Buckminster Fuller, who's teaching there, a friend of his, who's doing geodetic domes and geometry stuff. And the ceiling is very unresolved. It's not clear what it is. It's looking like a two-way tetrahedral slab, but it's not. It's really big beams. Then we span across, and then these are braces. Spanning across, this is the structure, these guys. This is simply bracing. I'm going to use a dirty word. Decorative. They're just totally not needed. but he wants to make more of the structure. We're going to see him figure out how to do that later. So this is so deep that he can hang the lights in here. The building a few years ago, well, let's back up. Kahn designed these flexible panels, and because of this tetrahedral grid, these panels can go in any direction and still be lined, a lot of directions, and still be lined up with the concrete. And these are, you can just see them here, you can't see them up here, but these are like spring-loaded pogo sticks. So that these are kept in the basement, they put them up, and they're braced in place by these spring-loaded pogo sticks. So you can flexibly do anything you want in the space. Clients, sounds like a winner. You can use it any way you want. Who knows what you're going to want to do in 5 years. Clients tend not to like that, and they brought in Paul Rudolph to put in permanent partitions. And Rudolph puts this band of black here to show this is not part of Kahn. But Kahn was really teed off. He didn't like what Rudolph did. So what business do you have messing with my building? They've gone back to the pogo sticks. They were, have restored it to what it originally was supposed to be. This is a photograph of it, all fixed up. And here's what he's doing. He's got, this is basically like a joist, floor joist, going from those big beams to those big beams. Then he's got these guys in there bracing it. Then he runs air ducts and electrical raceways, so you can reach up and plug into here with the lights, and they can, like we see here. One of the problems is his air ducts can't change direction. Another problem is you can't get in there to fix any of this stuff. So you have to go in with air hammers from above if you want to take out one of these tubes. This is the formwork, some of the formwork. And then the concrete gets poured. Here are the rebars. So here we see the, it hurts your eye to look at this thing. Which way is it going? So here we see the floor slab. These are acting as joists going from one side to the other. And then hanging in here are here are the columns. These are big enough for a 20-story building. And these are monster beams. Here we can see it. Here's the column, here's the beam. And it's just a little, 4-story building or something like that. So for Kahn, structure is not only what holds up the building, it also organizes our experience. So he calls these served and servant spaces. So the served spaces are for us. Servant is stairs, fire stairs, toilets, elevators, broom closets, and he's distinguishing between the two. Now he's coming out of the Miesian tradition of, or Corbu's open plan. Corbu's free plan. Frank Lloyd Wright's open plan, Corbu's free plan. He's coming out of Corbu's free plan and Mies's universal space. And he's saying the space is not universal. There's different kinds of space. There's stairs, toilets, and elevator spaces, and there's museum gallery spaces. And I want to create two different environments for these two different kinds of spaces. So for a while he was talking about served and servant spaces. He gets off on creating this triangular circular stair and At the time, there was an exhibit in Philadelphia of Lequeux, Boulez, and Ledoux. And you can look them up. But he wrote the catalog, or the introduction to the catalog for the exhibit. So he's looking at these very strong neoclassical 19th century French architects, and he's getting off on their forms, and that's probably the influence leading to this round stair. He's unable to reproduce it in the Yale building across the street because the fire department said, you can't do that. you can't make a mind tripper out of a fire stair. People have to be able to use it without getting confused. Now, a lot of the difference between this space and this space is how he renders the ceiling. When you're walking around in there, it's all one thing. This distinction doesn't really, it's not as strong as he would like to believe. Now, that's something interesting. It would be great if we could see more of this, but later he says, in other words, I'm looking at this and I've got a tetrahedral grid. What am I doing cutting it off in a rectangle? If it's a tetrahedral grid, the building should be six-sided. If this is a space frame, it wasn't, but he wanted it to be. Space frames work in any direction, so that you can have a ceiling of space frame, but the space frame can keep going and become the columns. And the stair, what am I dropping a round stair in a tetrahedral grid? Maybe the stair should be six-sided. So these sketches show some afterthoughts about what he might have done with, the project.